On January 8, 1942, Stephen William Hawking was born to Frank and Isabel Hawking in Oxford, England. From a young age, Hawking was remarkably intelligent, even being crowned the nickname Einstein in his mathematics class. After finishing his schooling, Hawking got accepted into Cambridge University. Whilst deciding on what to study, Hawking initially wanted to study math, but since they didn't have a class for math at the time, he decided to study science. This is a choice that has not only changed Hawking's life, but the lives of us and many future generations to come. During his time at Cambridge, Hawking met his future wife, Jane Wilde. Jane and Hawking soon after became romantically involved. In the year 1963, Hawking was diagnosed with motor neuron disease. After being diagnosed, Hawking was given 2 years to live. Regardless of his diagnosis and life expectancy, Jane remained by his side. Stephen Hawking also continued to work in his field of science. 2 years later, the two got engaged in 1964 and then married in 1965. Stephen and Jane Hawking had their first child, Robert Hawking, in 1967. In 1970, Jane would give birth to their second child, Lucy Hawking. Despite starting a family and his motor functions slowly becoming futile, Hawking did not slow down in his scientific research. Just a few years later, Hawking discovered that black holes emit radiation and subatomic particles, similar to a body losing heat. This, in theory, proved that black holes could eventually disappear. Hawking would go on to reveal his discoveries in a conference that was held on Valentine's Day of 1974. This discovery was initially seen as controversial and shocked physicists and cosmologists alike. Once accepted, this would come to be known as Hawking radiation. In 1779, Stephen Hawking would become Cambridge's LUCASIan Professor of Mathematics, a position that was once held by Sir Isaac Newton. Stephen Hawking would go on to uphold his position of Cambridge's LUCASIan Professor of Mathematics up until 2003. In 1985, Hawking was admitted in a hospital in Geneva with pneumonia. Stephen Hawking would undergo a procedure that would save his life, but inadvertently ruined what remained of his speech. Hawking would be bound to use a chart to communicate for a year, up until he began to use an electronic voice synthesizer. This would go on to become the voice of Hawking that we all recognize and love. In 1988, Stephen Hawking published his book, A Brief History of Time, which would instantaneously become a bestseller and would bring Hawking known to the general public. The following year, Hawking was offered knighthood by Queen Elizabeth II, but declined and thus became a Companion of Honor. Stephen Hawking and Jane would unfortunately get a divorce in 1995, with Jane stating, "To me, Stephen was my husband and the father of my children. One does not say to one's husband, 'Oh, you're so clever, I must worship the ground underneath your feet,' or in this case, wheels." Hawking would go on to marry his nurse, Elaine Mason. The two would later go on to divorce in 2007. There is no doubt in my mind that Stephen Hawking has had a difficult road. Stephen Hawking went from being a man who was given 2 years to live to a world-renowned scientist who will forever be honored. Hawking has also become a media icon, with his iconic voice and wheelchair. Despite several celebrities and icons alike offering to let Hawking use their voice in place of his robotic-sounding voice, Hawking would refuse. Hawking once stated, "I keep it because I have not heard a voice I like better, and because I identify with it." Hawking would appear in many forms of media, whether it be television shows such as The Simpsons or movies alike. In 2014, the Stephen Hawking biopic titled The Theory of Everything would be released. The film told the story of Dr. Stephen Hawking and would even go on to win an Academy Award. In March of 2018, Stephen Hawking would pass away at the age of 76, 51 years after his diagnosis. Stephen Hawking is evidence to all that despite the barriers you might face, you can still achieve great and wonderful things. Stephen Hawking has gone on to become an example and figure of hope to all people, and he will continue to be looked up to for many future generations to come.
And however difficult life may seem, there is always something you can do and succeed at. It matters that you don't just give up. While there's life, there is hope.